Fashion, it's the most important thing in life to some people. Find out what's in style and dress accordingly. But it's not always so simple. Sometimes one might risk a great level of comfort. Other times you might have just risked your life. Queen Elizabeth I, that's probably all you need to hear for her famous image to flash into your mind. With her fiery red hair and pale white face adorned with priceless jewelry and impossibly extravagant clothing, she is one of the more notable figures in all of history. She was the Queen of England and Ireland from 1558 to her death in 1603. Elizabeth's reign was known as the Elizabethan era, and it was a time where English drama and adventuring flourished. But among the fashion trends of this era lingered a deadly truth, a truth often overlooked and ignored. The fashion was quite literally to die for. Today, being tan is seen as in style. People will spend countless hours tanning out under the open sun or in tanning booths, both which have been proven to be harmful to our bodies. But like most obsessed with fashion, a little melanoma here and there isn't going to stop anything. Though tanning may be popular now, in the Elizabethan era it wasn't considered attractive at all. There was nothing to be admired about a tanned laborer who spent their day working tirelessly under the hot sun. The true expression of dignity and wealth was to have pale skin. If it's white as snow, you're good to go. Queen Elizabeth herself was the epitome of this trend. Her face always portrayed white as porcelain. Keeping your skin nice and pale doesn't sound too dangerous, but it was a lot more complicated than just avoiding direct sunlight. Those of wealth would use a popular high-demand cosmetic referred to as Venetian ceruse, a powder composed of a little bit of vinegar and a lot of white lead. Ah yes, there'd be no better way to get that pale white complexion everyone was raving about. Back then it seemed like such a terrific idea. Now, with advances in science, we've come to find that lead is poisonous. So it would come as a shock when the Elizabethan elite began to succumb to lead poisoning. All was well at first, as it served the only purpose it was believed to have had. But as time went on, the lead would begin to waste away the wearer's body and mind. Joints and muscles would begin to ache, headaches, memory loss, and mood disorders would set in. The person would begin to drastically change as the flesh, which they tried so hard to cover, began to corrode away from the extended contact. Those who adorned the ceruse at the height of fashion would crumble a long way down to a road that at times led to death. Fortunately, ceruse did eventually fall out of style. However, it is said to have contributed to the death of Queen Elizabeth herself. When it comes to fashion, women seem to be the ones most associated with it. And while that may be partly true, men have taken their own risks to stay in style. The detachable high collar, the 19th century fashion statement that will get you all choked up. The collar itself was, as the name implies, detachable and was fastened to the shirt by studs. This made it so the collar could be starched separately until it was practically as solid and unrelenting as cardboard. Like so many styles, the high collar was no exception to causing pain in exchange for trendiness. The collar was often so tight and stiff that the men who wore it found it a bit harder to swallow or even breathe correctly. That was a problem, especially when going out with friends and having a few drinks required getting dressed in your best. The issue with that was when the men had more than their fill and would begin to fade in and out of consciousness as they dwelled within their drunken stupor. The collars were literally so restrictive that a man's head falling forward from passing out could very well be enough to allow the collar to cut off the man's air and blood supply and kill him right then and there. But it wasn't always that difficult. A number of times the man didn't need to be drunk at all, depending on a number of factors such as the size of the man and the tightness of the collar. Indigestion and minor neck swelling from a surplus of food could very well choke the man to death right there while he was still awake and aware. I'm sure by now you understand not to overstart your detachable collars because they just might choke you to death. But that's not all they needed to cause a bit of damage. One man was even reported in the newspaper to have tripped while getting off a streetcar. He got up, dusted himself off, and realized he was bleeding profusely. The two starched corners of his collar had sunk right into his neck, leaving two unsightly gashes. Though not nearly as common anymore, high collars are still worn in some areas of the world. There are few fashion trends as extreme as the Chinese practice of foot binding. In 10th and 11th century China, feet as we now know them weren't seen as attractive. While for many people feet aren't attractive anyway, and to others they might be a bit too attractive, China's upper class took into consideration a procedure that would not only make women more desirable, but also cripple them for life. Small, petite feet were all the rave for women of wealth. But those unattractive, normal-sized feet just wouldn't do. They had to be fixed, starting at an early age. The process was usually initiated in the winter, as the cold would keep the feet more numb and in less crippling pain. Young girls would begin by having their feet soaked in animal blood mixed with herbs in order to soften the foot. The bandages used to bind the foot were prepared the same way. From there, the toenails would be clipped back as far as they could be, and if that wasn't painful enough, the toes were folded beneath the foot and pressed into the sole so hard that the toes were snapped and broken. But the pain wasn't over. On to breaking the arch so that the foot could bend in half, therefore limiting its pesky length. With this being done, the foot would then be tightly wrapped in the bandages to retain its new shape. If the girl was lucky, her feet would achieve a status referred to as the Golden Lotus. This would mean that the girl's feet didn't exceed 3 inches in length. Women with tiny feet were honored by their families, their husbands especially. Women who had undergone the foot binding process were given the finest silks for their feet, and their dainty, wobbly walk was seen as intensely erotic to men. The upper class would rebind their daughters' feet numerous times, attempting to tighten the wraps more and more to make a smaller foot. This would obviously cause immense pain. Certain families, if high enough in the social ranks, would see that the rebinding process occurred once a day. Aside from the unreal pain and lifelong crippling, there were some other downsides to this fashion statement. One might figure that the fact that the folds in the feet couldn't be properly cleaned would be decidedly unattractive, seeing that whenever the bindings were removed from the feet, there would be an overwhelmingly foul odor emanating from them. Ingrown toenails, if the toenails weren't simply ripped off to begin with, would often cause horrible infections. Constricted blood flow to the toes would at times cause them to fall off. This was considered a good thing, as it allowed the feet to be even smaller without so much worry. It was such a good thing, in fact, that sometimes glass shards or pieces of broken tile would be inserted between the toes to deliberately rot them away. This at times would lead to septic shock, and the girl would unfortunately meet a premature and horrible death. Many campaigns and even an emperor himself tried to outlaw foot binding, but it persisted. It took until the early 20th century for foot binding to fall out of style, and some older women still suffer with their severe disability even today. How far would you go to look good? It goes to show that some in years past, and perhaps even today, would put their life on the line for it. That's all for now. Remember, you may not believe it, but anything is possible in a world so seriously strange. I'm Rob Dyke, and I'll see you next Wednesday, so don't forget to subscribe, because you won't want to miss it.